Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's conversation with Ellen Jackowski, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Mastercard. This is part of the Woods Institute's ongoing series of conversations with sustainability leaders who've made a real difference and whose experiences can help all of us better understand both the sustainability landscape and our own options. Before addressing the main topic, I want to start with acknowledging the indigenous people on whose ancestral land those of us at Stanford sit today. Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. I'm Chris Field, the director of the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. The Woods Institute has been, for 20 years, the Stanford marquee investment in advancing understanding and developing practical, just solutions to our era's pressing environmental problems. Woods scholars team with other researchers, governments, companies, and NGOs to build bridges from research to action to address challenges in climate, health, food, water, oceans, and biodiversity. We're excited to be a founding pillar in the bold new Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability, which is turning 2, just as the Woods Institute turns 20. The format for today's conversation is that I'll kick things off with a few questions. At about 20 minutes before the hour, I'll turn the figurative microphone to all of you in the audience and pose questions from all of you. To get a question into the queue, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Apologies in advance if we don't have time to get to all your questions. Ellen joined Mastercard as Chief Sustainability Officer in 2022. Her goal at Mastercard is to help further integrate the environment and social and governance goals into the company's strategy. Prior to joining Mastercard, Ellen was the Chief Sustainability and Social Impact Officer at HP. At HP, Ellen and her team were instrumental in embedding sustainable impact at the core of HP's 2030 vision and strategy, and in setting, measuring, and reporting some of the most comprehensive goals in the tech industry. Under her leadership, HP was named America's most responsible company by Newsweek. It was the first and only tech company in the world to receive a quadruple A rating for climate, forest, water, and supplier engagement leader from CDP, and it topped 3BL's Media's Best Corporate Citizen list. Ellen has a record of major accomplishments in diverting ocean-bound plastics, conserving and restoring global forests, and connecting executive compensation to sustainable impact progress. Ellen's first job was as an ice cream server at Ben & Jerry's. It was there that she was convinced of the potential for sustainability impact from the private sector. In 2021, GreenBiz named Ellen one of the top 25 badass women of climate science action. So, Ellen, thanks so much for joining today. And let me start with a question about what you did learn at Ben & Jerry's and how did that plant the seed that the private sector was where you wanted to be?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for this discussion. So excited to be here today with all of you. So Ben & Jerry's, that was back in high school. And, like many high schoolers, I needed some extra cash to support my hobbies at the time. And Ben & Jerry's had a franchise that was just down the street from my house. So when I joined the company as an ice cream scooper, I learned a lot of interesting things, right? How can a company that's doing something fairly simple like making ice cream for the local community embed environmental and social impact into the core of their business? So they were some of the first kind of disruptors, right, in this space of truly building that into how their company operates on a daily basis, both from a social and environmental point of view. So while it was something simple that I was doing and the job that I had, just seeing how the company operated at a very tactical level and how those environmental and social values that they brought were really part of the core. How the ice cream was made, what hormones were not used in the production of the milk that was the base for the ice cream, how they treated the labor and the rights that we had as part of the company. So very important experience for me in understanding the power of a company and its values and how it can truly be built into the core of the business.
And as an ice cream server, how did they communicate all those things to you, and how have you taken lessons that Ben & Jerry either used or didn't use and put those in place in your role in HP and Mastercard?
Well, so I think the communication piece of what do they even communicate on the package, right? About the ingredients that go into the product, the thought. When you went onto their website, for example, there were also many other things that they were communicating about. For example, environmental policies that many other companies back at the time weren't communicating about so freely. In terms of, the packaging that everything arrived in, and being thoughtful about the materials that they used and why they selected the things that they did. And then again, from a social impact point of view, the rights of the workers, excuse me, and how they structured kind of their code of conduct for employees. All of those things, both environmental and social, I think came through quite strongly. And so as a young worker, very impressionable. It just really opened my eyes to the power that business could have.
And could you say a few things about your trajectory between being an ice cream server and being a chief sustainability officer?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C., on the outskirts. And so, at the time in high school, I was very focused on student government. So while Ben & Jerry's was my summer job and job throughout high school, I was very focused on government. I thought that was going to be my career path. So went to college and during the summers then started interning for my U.S. Senator on Capitol Hill. Then I interned at NATO in Brussels representing the U.S. mission. And it was there that I had a big kind of aha. I was there when the Secretary General, Manfred Werner, passed away. So I had a front seat to see the change of power. And, someone who was very impressionable and really thought I was going to go into the State Department. That was my career. The team members that I worked with at the time at the U.S. mission, when I saw the role that they played in this change of power, my expectation was they're the experts. I'd been with them all summer. I'd been watching how they worked. But the reality was quite different from their involvement in some of those decisions. So honestly, I went back to school my senior year and I got a job as an intern at First Chicago Bank. So completely changed the trajectory I was on. Then as I was graduating, management consulting was kind of the hot job at the time. I thought, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. My plan has kind of shifted. Why don't I try a consulting job? And I interviewed and I found a firm called Via International. And they had very different ideas about how to run their firm than some of the bigger names. For example, they believed in open compensation, where you knew what all of the partners in the firm made in terms of salary, all the way down to the assistants. Everybody knew what my bonus was that year, what my raise was, and I knew everybody else's. So this concept of radical transparency and bringing light, shining light in an area that traditionally wasn't so open was also very interesting to me. And I think that, is a sustainability principle and some of the things that are happening today around disclosure, at an early age, again, it was really set a signal for me about the importance of things like transparency. So anyway, I worked at that consulting firm for a few years. One of the clients was HP, and I was put on that job. And our senior leader at HP at the time then was asked to take on, sustainability, and wanted a strategist to come in and help shape the strategy of the company. So I switched then from consulting to HP, and then grew up there for about 15 years, always in sustainability, to eventually become their chief sustainability and social impact officer.
And how did you find at HP the conversation went between you as an advocate for sustainability and the corporate leadership as, I don't know how to characterize them. Were they pushing you to push the company, or did you have to motivate the effort from your end?
Well, in a way similar to Ben & Jerry's, Bill and Dave, the founders of Hewlett-Packard, had core values very much aligned with environmental and social perspectives. So, for example, the company, when they set their first 8 corporate objectives, revenue, profit, one of those was called global citizenship. Our language has changed. We now call it sustainability or ESG. But they had that on their list way back when, they were coming with that first list of corporate objectives. So I joined a company, again, not by accident, that shared very similar values to mine. And in that sense, there was already license to operate in this space. They already had a sustainability team. This was a while ago, right? They were one of the first, right, to have a sustainability report, for example. So there was this kind of combination of the company wanting this all the way from the top, but then as well, by the time I joined the company had been around for several decades. So the motivation and kind of the DNA, the corporate culture to being focused on ESG, environmental and social impact, that was kind of already there. So I was brought in to be an innovator to continue on that agenda. But it wasn't so much me kind of fighting against the company or being an internal activist. There was already a lot going on. And
when you started at HP, can you say something about the balance between the environmental, the social, and the governance components of the sustainability framework?
Sure. Well, and that's interesting because at HP, very different in terms of their history and their focus, in terms of what's material to them, right? Environment was a very big focus for the company. It made a lot of products, a lot of PCs, printers, 3D printers, going back in its history, calculators, all sorts of different products. So the environmental concerns, were big, and the impact was big carbon footprint. Where I am at now, I'll talk a little bit about that transition. I'm at Mastercard, a company that doesn't make anything, right? It's a payments network. So their carbon footprint is quite small. Where Mastercard has focused historically is on financial inclusion from an ESG point of view, a social impact issue, because that's more core to who they are and to that business. So I think rightly so, HP was very focused on its carbon footprint, its environmental impact, as well as its supply chain code of conduct, because the supply chain is very vast, but different from the company I'm at now.
And we'll swing back to this. Mastercard, even though it doesn't make anything, touches almost every other business because people are using the payment system to purchase stuff that has materials in it and stuff that has labor in it. So I'm really interested in circling back in a few minutes to how you think about the reach of Mastercard and your ability to influence other players in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and the way I frame kind of what's happened in my career is I was at HP, kind of on the supply side, right? This company making many things and pushing it out every day. And the challenge there was moving from a transactional company to a circular company, right? Instead of selling product, leasing, and really thinking about the circular model. Whereas at Mastercard, I'm now kind of on the demand side of what's going on. Sitting at HP, we would do these surveys all the time of our customers. Who would like to buy the low carbon, made of recycled content, energy efficient PC? Oh, I would. Everybody answers, I would love to buy that product. Who bought the low carbon, recycled content, energy efficient PC? And those answers were vastly different. It's the say-do gap. So I was always very frustrated on how do we help change the mindset? How do we help change the purchasing patterns? So now that I'm more on this demand side at Mastercard, and the scale that we're talking about there, we have over 90 million merchants on the network, over 20,000 banking partners. And the really kind of big number is 3 billion cards in circulation. And when you put that in the context of 8 billion people on the planet, and we have 3 billion cards in circulation. Now, some people have multiple MasterCards, but in general, we see an expansive amount of consumption, right? So we really are sitting in a very unique position to be able to help transition to a more sustainable, regenerative economy. The thing that at HP, kind of one of the things that I was really struggling with in that position of how do we affect the demand for these types of products? And now I've moved to the other side.
And how at HP did you affect the demand for the low carbon, recycled, composition, energy efficient PC?
Yeah, well, that we could talk about for ages, but part of it is delivering, and I think this is one of the things, people always use the example of Tesla, right? Like Tesla packaged this incredible disruptive sustainability product, right, for the auto industry in this amazing package. Like, the car is beautiful. It drives, incredibly fast for people who love that. Its usability is so streamlined with this simple screen. So the benefit that you're getting is so much, including sustainability. It's not just about the recycled, low carbon, et cetera. And I think HP, for some of its products at the time that I was there, the Dragonfly, delivered this beautiful, streamlined, super light, slick product that was made with ocean-bound plastic, some of its parts, that had, an incredible level of energy efficiency for its time. So I think those are some of the ways.
Drive people to the products because they're sexy, attractive, and high-performing, in addition to being sustainable.
And use revolutionary sustainable materials. Yeah.
One of the things that I'm impressed at with your HP agenda is being willing to tackle the issues of forest protection, especially as it relates to all the paper that goes through the printers. How did you think about viewing that as part of the problem you should be dealing with?
Well, again, I think it comes back to what is the purpose of the company? What is most material? And obviously, as a company that sells printers, and while we also sold paper, HP has branded paper, but the volume of that was so small compared to the full paper market. But obviously, we make a product that is completely reliant on trees and on forests. So it is highly material to the company. It is in the company's interest to ensure that the paper that we are selling and that goes through our printers is regenerative, and that we have a plan for that. So that was core to who the company was, incredibly important, and we made sure that that was one of the key pillars of its strategy.
You've already a couple of times mentioned the importance of data and verification for sustainability efforts. How do you think about figuring out whether you're really succeeding on the sustainability fronts, and what kind of initiatives do you think other companies should be taking on to really know whether they're delivering on their promises?
Yeah, so one of the strategies that we're working on now at Mastercard, again, given who we are, is our sustainable consumption strategy. And the theory there, we have 3 pillars: inspire, inform, and enable. And inspire is about how do we change the mindset of the consumer, of the person purchasing something, to want to live a more sustainable, fulfilling lifestyle. The second pillar is inform. How do we ensure that once someone's inspired to make a more sustainable choice, they actually know what is more sustainable or not? And then the third pillar is enable. How do they turn that intention into action and real impact? And one of the things, love the strategy. I could, again, go on for many hours about each of those pillars and what we're doing. But a key that we need to figure out is, how do we measure that? How do you measure if you've inspired somebody to do something? The Sustainable Development Goal from the UN that this all ladders up to is SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. And when you look at the UN metrics that they've set, like what's listed there when you go onto their webpage, those metrics aren't really measurable. There's one that they have, which is halve food waste, and the amount of food waste in the world. Okay, there's one that you can technically measure. So that's not a place where we found a lot of insight. So we've actually just had a workshop with World Resources Institute to sit down and figure out for our sustainable consumption strategy, which we're evolving now, what are the right metrics? How do we credibly measure? For example, in Enable, one of the actions that we're taking is working with public sector transit systems like the New York subway to move away from needing a Metro card, a separate card that's physical that you have to carry to get into the subway system. Now you can just tap your Mastercard on the turnstile and go. You don't need to get the separate card. We're trying to take the friction out of the low carbon transit. So great, we did this in New York, we've done it in London, Rome, Amsterdam, many cities. But how do we measure the fact that we've taken the friction out? It's faster to tap, that their ridership is increasing. So plenty of complex problems here, but it's important to get those metrics right. And of course, momentum over perfection. Let's start measuring the best we can while we're innovating and working to change. But the measurement piece is incredibly important, and we're doing a lot of investment to make sure we're being honest with ourselves about the change we're responsible for and the intention that we're trying to create.
Let me ask one more question about this payment system for the subway, because I can imagine that being a really important enabler to encourage people to take the train, even if they don't have the ticket. And so what's required? What are the steps of negotiating with the transit authority in order to make that work?
Well, what's interesting there is, how do you have that conversation? Who's the decision maker? And, who are the influencers? So clearly for MasterCard's business, and this is really important for all businesses, we need to make money in this transition to sustainable consumption. MasterCard makes money when people buy stuff, right?
We can come back to that. That's an
So that
topic.
is kind of at the core of our business.
Yeah.
Can consumption be sustainable? Do those two words ever go together? Like, how do you make this work? And so the public transit system, this is one of those first early areas where it actually really works. The more people tap their MasterCards, we make money off of that, right? That's our business. And it's driving adoption of this low carbon solution. So I know I've lost the train of thought for your question, but I think that's the key point.
It's a really nice example of a friction reducer, and my unsophisticated perspective is that having MasterCard out there as the master transaction facilitator tends to increase consumption, whether it's sustainable or not. And I think your job, as I understand it, is to move the needle to encourage people to make the sustainable choices, even though the kind of historic role of MasterCard, or all the credit cards, is to facilitate the transaction, to increase the consumption. Yeah. And so how do you think about moving the needle towards sustainability?
And I'll say, this isn't just me, right? This is the company. I'm having conversations at the board level, conversations with our CEO and our executive leadership team. We all recognize this transition is happening, needs to happen, and we need to be an enabler and a leader in driving this transformation. So it is about figuring out the new business model. And again, I'll relay that back to HP, where when I was there, it was, how do we transition this business, which has been built on transactions, shipping product every day, to circular? That is a fundamental business model shift. And that's a bit of what we're talking about here around moving the historical consumption to sustainable consumption. So, what does that economic model look like? How do we help our merchants transform? And you can already see, there's a big market shift happening, right? Consumers' preferences are changing. And how do we stay one step ahead, if not many steps ahead, in helping facilitate that transition? So I think it really is about the future of our business. This is it, sustainable consumption.
And I guess I really appreciate the example with the subway tickets. In general, I don't think of the MasterCard as having any influence on my decision about what I buy or what I don't buy. And how do you change that?
Yeah, well, so that goes back to inspire, inform, enable, and I'll give you some examples. And this is early days for us building this strategy out. But already this year in 2024, for Inspire, MasterCard for 16 years has been a sponsor of the Grammys in the United States. So this year, we leveraged our sponsorship to partner with SZA, the most nominated Grammy artist. And she dropped a new song called Saturn on the Sunday night of the Grammys. It was filmed in a forest. Her outfit, cheesy as this might sound, was made out of seeds that Conservation International helped us pick out, so that when her followers bid for the seeds and we shipped them to them, wherever they planted them, they wouldn't be invasive species, all those things. So this was about leveraging the power of this major influencer, and how can she inspire her followers to want a more sustainable, fulfilling lifestyle. To action that and connect that inspire all the way through inform to enable, we partnered with Lyft during the time of the Grammys, so a couple weeks after, including Grammys. When if you registered for a Lyft ride, when you requested that ride, up to, I think it was $1 million, Lyft would restore a tree in partnership with the Mastercard Priceless Planet Coalition. So it was about lining up some of our biggest merchants like Lyft. We did it with SiriusXM. If at the time you signed up with SiriusXM around the Grammys, same thing, a tree was restored. So how are we tying inspiration to action throughout our merchants all the way through to the cardholder, where everybody sees some sort of benefit from these types of activities?
And can you say a little more about what the creation process looks like for some of these initiatives, like the Grammy one? Do you reach out to Lyft, or do you reach out to other companies and say, let's partner on a sustainability venture?
Yeah, so for that example, we have this program at Mastercard called the Priceless Planet Coalition. It's a commitment to restore 100 million trees by 2030. And the word coalition is really important because this is not just Mastercard doing this. This is us working with many of our merchants and trying to attract them to join the coalition, like Lyft, like SiriusXM, and many of our issuers, so some of the biggest banks in the world, joining the coalition to help generate the funds for that type of restoration. So for something like the Grammys, one, we're leveraging the sponsorship we already have. We decide, and it was great because our chief marketing officer, our head of marketing in North America, we're all about kind of testing and learning in this space as we move towards sustainable consumption. So did that work? Did the SZA, did that actually inspire people to do something differently? We have back to the metrics, we have traditional marketing metrics for that. How many views did we get compared to whatever we did at the Grammys last year? And what I can say about this one is the views were off the charts. I mean, everybody was thrilled with the results. Our marketing experts were thrilled. So that just brings more momentum to go back to our partners in the coalition to attract more people to say, look, we're seeing a shift here. And now, are those the perfect measures? Those were great marketing measures. We don't have yet the impact measures for Inspire. That's what that workshop was about with World Resources Institute, to figure out how do we better measure the impact of how we're trying to inspire these new behaviors.
It feels like MasterCard has a unique opportunity by touching so many different companies, and the potential to be a real enabler of sort of creative ideas. But it's also pretty clear that the companies have to be interested in going in sustainability directions. And are you finding across the space of the interactions that you're in that there is a real commitment, a real appetite for finding ways to make real sustainability commitments at the same time companies make money?
Well, I mean, again, this is the key question, right, of our generation and the next generation. How do we enable this transition? It is going to it has to happen. We know that. I mean, again, we're sitting here in California, right? The wildfires, the floods, climate change is here. If we don't do this, our businesses are threatened. If you're a consumer, people are thinking about this more because it's truly now affecting their lives, their kids. A study came out last summer. This was really interesting. John Marshall did this research, and he's a former executive from Lippincott, so a big marketing agency. And the research, he did this big global study to understand what are the levers that will shift behavior of people towards this. And it was something like 12x anything else. The answer was love. Love for your children, love for your family members. Like, that is why people will make a better choice, a more sustainable choice. So, again, I think consumers' minds are changing. We're seeing it in the data. The intention is there. Is the action there? Back to the say-do gap. There's still a gap, no question. But the intention is that people want to do it. They maybe aren't, back to inspire, inform, enable. Maybe they don't have the right information. Like, what actually is more sustainable? Like, remember the whole discussion with the Prius. Oh, well, the Prius, is hybrid, so it uses less fossil fuels. That's good. Oh, but what about the battery? Oh, we've got all these problems with the battery and the materials there. So, this is complex, and we're still working to figure out how do we inform people with the right information. And that leads to one of our products, the Mastercard Carbon Calculator, which we've been providing. And we have more work to do there, too. It's a first-generation product. But I think the sentiment amongst our value chain is the market is shifting. Their customers' preferences are shifting. Ours certainly are, and we all need to meet the moment.
And when you think about something like a carbon calculator that would say, for example, this Tesla is better for the environment than this Ford, is Ford okay with that, given that Mastercard needs to be used by customers of both companies?
Yeah, very good question. So, the words that we're using, inspire, inform, enable, those are very purposeful. It's not inspire, judge, enable, right? Like, we're not making judgments. That is not our role, right? We're not making decisions for people on our network. That is not our role. Kind of like, for example, if you want to buy alcohol with a MasterCard, you can buy alcohol. If you want to buy cigarettes with a MasterCard, you can buy cigarettes. If you want to buy an abortion with MasterCard, if it is legal, you can use your MasterCard. So we are not judging. We're just providing information for you to decide what you want to do. And I think that's our clear role.
Could you say a little bit more about the ways you can provide information in addition to the calculator, which I think is interesting and really valuable? Are there other frontiers that you're pursuing?
Well, so the calculator is kind of the core right now. And I'll just talk a little bit about what that is and what that isn't and how we're hoping to evolve it. So the calculator is post-transaction. So at the end of the month, if the issuer, the bank that you bank with and have your MasterCard with, provides the calculator, at the end of the month you get your bill, right, of everything you've bought and the financial impact. Then you get your bill with line items of everything you bought and the estimated carbon impact of that. So the idea is, that data needs to get more granular. We provide it at the sector level. We're moving to the merchant and eventually to the SKU. So you bought a plane ticket. Okay, the average of all plane tickets. You bought a United Airlines plane ticket. You bought a United Airlines plane ticket from San Francisco to New York in economy class on a Boeing 737. That's where we need to get, and we're not there yet. So working on getting more granular. But then also, the power that we have here is we're providing that post-transaction. Wouldn't it be better if we worked with our merchants and provided that pre-transaction? So when you're making the choice, our merchants are aligned with the data that we have. And again, we don't decide what's the carbon value, just like we never decide what the price is of something. That is provided by a trusted source. So I think I'm really excited about the possibilities there. And eventually, once that scales, kind of what that could offer. I mean, there's a lot of value that we could uncover. So very excited about what we're doing there.
Have you considered similar support for issues like biological diversity or equal treatment of workers?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, that list could get expansive. I think, for us, it's focus, figure it out, get it right, scale, and expand. So certainly those are natural extensions of this work, but right now, we're still working on getting the carbon right.
Really, really interesting. And the trajectory for that is that individual banks that are MasterCard issuers are signing up to have that be part of their package.
That's right. And again, we're also working with some merchants to provide that data, at the point of sale, right, where it may be more useful. And that, I think, is even more powerful, right, is once they standardize on some of this data as well and provide it, that could be really exciting.
I'm going to take another 5 minutes or so for questions from me, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. So please be thinking about those. I wonder if you could say a few things about, especially the regulatory environment that you operate in, and whether there are things that should be done by governments that would make it a lot easier for you to accomplish your sustainability goals as a person and as a company.
Well, even just looking at the Inflation Reduction Act and how that is changing the landscape for businesses and the opportunities for startups in the clean tech space. I mean, it's amazing, right? What it is opening up in terms of innovation, speed, scale. And I think even looking at Europe and how they've responded to that, right? First, the threat of, wait a minute, the US is doing something so ambitious, we better hurry up and figure out our plan. I think that's been fantastic. The power of regulation in this space in the right way, I think can be enormous. One of the things we're watching very closely and having a lot of dialogue about is happening in the EU with the product passport regulation. So back to the carbon calculator. Wow, as we're struggling to figure out what is the best carbon source when we get down to the SKU level, like how do we have that trusted information? So not kind of possibly greenwashing data that comes from the manufacturer itself, but like what's the standard and how do we make sure that it's trusted? Because again, like what's one of the things MasterCard sells? It's trust. When you use your MasterCard, you know that whatever you bought for that amount, like that's all that's going to be taken out of your account and not anymore. So how do we make sure we're functioning with that same level of trust as we move into these spaces? So some of the regulation, like the product passport, I think is very interesting. Because if that could move fast enough and scale, that could be potentially a great source for us for that data.
So much of the focus of modern sustainability is on addressing issues of global equity, and there are huge differences in the extent to which people in rich versus poor countries really have access to financial tools like MasterCard. How do you think about the equity dimensions and ways that things like a credit card can actually be a tool for aiding the development of an equitable global society?
Well, this comes back to, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, financial inclusion and inclusive growth. So that's an area where MasterCard has been leading for decades. Actually, 10 years ago this year, MasterCard founded the Center for Inclusive Growth. And we have an ambitious goal to connect 1 billion people to the digital economy by 2025. And I'll give a plug, our ESG report for 2023 is coming out in 2 weeks, I think, 2 weeks. So keep a lookout for it if you're interested. But our data on financial inclusion, what we've been able to do and build and those capabilities through the center, which is philanthropic, as well as through our financial inclusion products that we sell, has been enormous. So that is a clear focus for the company. And that's another, doing well by doing good, right? It is good for our business if more people have access to the digital economy. It is good for society if more people have access. So that's...
Can you say a little more about your financial inclusion product?
Sure. Well, there are many versions of that. One example, and this is a nice tie, I think, to how financial inclusion, so when we think about our environmental activities as well as our social impact activities kind of overlap. I joined MasterCard about 1.5 years ago, and one of the first examples that I was kind of prepared with was this pilot we were doing in Egypt with a garment factory owner. And we were doing this pilot to transition the workers in the garment factory from cash payments to a digital mobile wallet. And in the garment factory, 80% of the workers are female, 20% male. And what was happening when they were paid in cash, the women would go home, the husband would take it, the father would take it, the head of household. It wasn't theirs. So in the pilot that we were running, when we transitioned them to the digital mobile wallet, what was happening is they were saving money, right? They were actually able to have more agency over their income. So an incredible proof point for this digital mobile wallet, the financial inclusion tools. But then in the context of this is happening in Egypt, where climate change is already very clearly impacting the community. And so if the workers are now saving more money, they're actually able to adapt better to the impacts of climate change, right? If climate migration becomes something that they need to seriously consider, moving with that digital mobile wallet is much more secure than moving with a bunch of cash in your pockets. So this combination between financial inclusion as a tool for climate adaptation and resilience is an area that we're also exploring quite a bit. It was kind of unintentional from the start of that type of work, or from the decades that we've been building these tools and capabilities, but it's a reality. It's a great additional impact.
And is the enabler of that the country has to operate at a threshold of financial sophistication in order for the digital wallet to work?
Right. Well, so there are a couple of components to that. One, it's making sure that the individual, right, has this digital wallet. Two, that the digital payment systems are accepted places. So the acceptance piece is a key part of it. So the strategy has to be holistic for the whole system to work.
And when I think about a country like Egypt that's at a kind of a lower middle income? Is that countries kind of at that income and higher, or generally at a level of sophistication where that can happen?
Well, we're working all over the world with our financial inclusion program. For example, we've got this other product called Community Pass. There's a section of that product, Farm Pass, that's focused on farmers and moving farmers, particularly in Africa, into the digital economy as well. One of the things that we've seen when we've been able to do this is all of the middlemen in that process who take a cut of the farmer's profitability, now they are moving out of the system. Like, the farmer can skip over them. So they're more profitable. So back to, there's a great financial inclusion story there, but then there's also a great climate resilience story, because oftentimes in certain parts of Africa, their drought is already very apparent and a real threat. And they're able to take some of the extra cash that they've now been able to save by not paying the middlemen because of the switch that's been made, and deal with some of the climate factors.
So in addition to reducing friction, as you described for the New York subway system, you're also removing some of the opportunities for siphoning off funds in a more informal economy setting.
Yeah.
It's been fabulous. I look forward to hearing the questions from the audience, and why don't we transition to some of those now. And for those of you whose questions I don't get to, I apologize in advance. We have a large bunch. I'm going to start with one here from Marshall Dinovitz. Does MasterCard and you support having the SEC finalize strong disclosure rules to prevent greenwashing in the financial sector, including in the credit card companies?
Well, the anticipation over these SEC rules has been, strong, right? They came out with the proposed rules about 2 years ago. And what I will say is, in Europe, the CSRD, so their version of disclosure, which is much more broad in terms of the regulation, that kind of supersedes to a certain extent what the SEC did. So for us, there are layers to all of this disclosure, and what Europe is doing is kind of leading the way. We have to comply with that, whereas the CSRD has scope 1, 2, and scope 3. And the SEC is just scope 1 and scope 2. California now included scope 3. This disclosure is important. Back to my point about transparency with open compensation, the more light you shine in these areas, oftentimes the better decisions get made, more equitable decisions get made. So there's certainly a lot of burden that comes with these things too. So kind of doing them in the right way, in a way that is effective and efficient, I think is important.
Actually, let me ask a question that directly follows up on this issue of how you provide additional information. And to the questioner, I apologize. My device here is not showing your complete name, but it's Elizabeth something. And the question is, a product's environmental footprint extends beyond carbon emissions, for example, trace metal contamination from batteries. Have you thought about how to account for these other environmental factors in the calculator? And how about upstream emissions?
Yeah, so right now the calculator is just carbon, right? So some of these other things, which could be expansions on it, we've thought about, but right now we're focusing on kind of getting that more granular. And as like I said, not just post-transaction, but pre-transaction. So I think there's space certainly for all of that. But again, it's like, how do you tile that work? How do you prioritize it in a way that you get far enough along where you've made significant impact, where you can now expand your focus?
This is another question that builds on that. The questioner's name is not included here. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. Fascinating. I'm listening in from the UK and was wondering if you could speak to the challenges or limitations you notice in international collaborations, and are there ways to overcome these challenges, especially in a globalized economy?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, there's a lot of learnings, right? There's a lot of innovation happening all over the world. So one of the great things about working at a global company like Mastercard is you can see, like the pilots that I mentioned in Egypt, and like what's working, why is it working, what are the barriers, taking those learnings, which we've done now from Egypt, and we're doing something similar in Cambodia with the garment industry there, for example. So so I think there's so many positives about learning and innovating in one space and then kind of taking that and being able to scale through the network that MasterCard has. So always room to do more, but I don't know, I'm just inspired by all the different things that each of our markets, for example, we have a global strategy, but then they take it upon themselves to uniquely implement it in their region. And we often have these calls where the different markets come together and we're sharing, what's happening, what's working, what's not, why, and then able to kind of effectively scale those. So,
is your position? It's essentially global in its reach. And does MasterCard have sustainability teams who report up from different places around the world?
Oh, it's almost like I paid you to ask that question. So how big is my team, right? My team's quite small, but how big is the sustainability team at MasterCard? It's 30,000 people. It's every single employee of the company. And why can I say that? I can say that because we changed our compensation. Where now every single employee gets a bonus in February when they get their annual compensation statement for ESG. What is our progress against our ESG goals? And if we've met the criteria for each of those goals, then everybody in the company gets paid out on that. So in that sense, there's this incentive for people to think about, if I'm in marketing, what's my role? What are the decisions I'm making? How do I affect this? And I should say, at MasterCard, 30% of our carbon footprint comes from marketing. Who would have thought that? Interesting. We do a lot of sponsorships like the Grammys, like Major League Baseball, et cetera. So anyway, I think that's another fundamental cultural shift of how serious we are about this transition.
In the intro, I mentioned that you were involved in a sustainability-linked compensation at HP as well. How have people responded to that?
In general, I think, I'll say for MasterCard, the two cycles I've been in where I've gotten my paycheck and I have, literally it comes, the annual statement. And the first line is, what's your base salary? What's the percentage increase you got? The second line is, what's your bonus and the percent that you achieved? And then the third line is this ESG compensation modifier. So in the last 2 years, it's been paid out in a very significant way. So this is not small money that we're talking about. So I think people are excited. Now, if we start missing some of our goals, people may feel differently. But in this sense, it's a carrot. It could also be a stick. But we're riding, some success of the last 2 years and some of the progress that we've made. So it's opened this door to, how can you contribute? And I mean, I spend a lot of my time, I get a lot of requests for career conversations. People in different parts of the company. I want to be on the sustainability. I have a passion. How do I get involved? Well, guess what? Every job is a sustainability job. And again, some of the most unusual, jobs that you might not think about, like marketing, having such an important role. Data centers are another big piece of our carbon footprint. So everybody has a role to play, and there's something you can do. And so I think people see it as very hopeful.
This thread, and I promise I'm getting back to the questions in a minute here, right? But I really do want to tug a little bit on the thread you just started with the comments about everybody being part of the sustainability team. Because I think the narrative is often that the sustainability team in a big company has ambitious goals, but no real mechanism to assure that those become the company's goals, and especially that they get integrated through every level in the company. And it seems like this compensation link to sustainability is a very important lever to do that, and an amazingly direct way for the company leadership to signal what it's committed to.
Yeah, and I think it has to be followed up though. So, initially we started with this carrot stick with the compensation. Okay, great, but I sit in procurement, or I'm in our finance department. I see I got this on my statement. I didn't have anything to do with that. How do I even affect those things? I don't know. So that's the next, question of how do we create awareness and training and tools for people to understand how they fit in and what levers they have that contribute to the success or not of our achievements here. So we followed up, the compensation lever with what we call ESG and action guides. We've rolled those out for many of the different areas. We just did one for the technologists last month. And that had things like, okay, you're bringing new servers on. What are you decommissioning? That was the key question of, you can't just bring new servers on that are more energy efficient and, great towards our goals. But what are you taking offline, and making sure that you're thinking holistically about the full set of technology that we're using. This week, we launched our ESG and action guide for administrative assistants. And this was really exciting. How this came about, I was trying to get a meeting with our president of Europe. And so I was on the phone with his assistant. And so we're just doing scheduling. And then she says at the end of the call, oh, by the way, I'm doing this podcast with some of the assistants, and I'm going to mention, sustainability in air travel for Mark, the gentleman who she supports. And so I said, oh, well, wait a minute. I didn't really think about the assistants as a group inside Mastercard, because they don't, it's not like its own organization. So let's create an ESG and action guide. So she co-partnered with my team to create this thing. So we're doing this across the company, and in rolling that out to the assistants, first of all, the examples, the innovation. She has this whole process for zero waste meetings that we've now brought to scale with all the administrative assistants of, what is a zero waste meeting? How do you run one? How do you plan one? What does that mean for your catering, for the transport to get to and from the meeting? So anyway, I could talk more about that.
But I think it is a beautiful example of kind of bottom-up empowerment and benefits that can come from paying attention to the people who are in the trenches doing the everyday work.
Right. And again, the impact that they have, right?
Yeah. Let me turn to another question from the list here. This one is from Josh Martin. Josh says, as the U.S. representative for ADES, I would like to hear more about how you start the digital wallet system in poor countries like Madagascar.
So that is a good question. I don't know that I'm the best representative to answer exactly how we start that. But I'm sure there are definitely people within the company that can talk about the full process there. And again, our Center for Inclusive Growth, which has been around for a decade, this is what they're doing. This is what our Community Pass team is doing, is they're going to the far reaches of the planet and figuring out how to ensure everybody is digitally included. So I can refer you to some people who could have a deeper conversation, but I don't know that much more.
Okay. Well, Josh has his contact information, and I'm sure he would appreciate a response.
Happy to.
A question that is a little more connected to the politics today from Bill Gorham. What sort of pushback are you getting at Mastercard, or is Mastercard getting to your carbon calculator and other initiatives considered woke?
Yeah. Our statement is doing well by doing good. This is part of our business strategy. This is part of the future of the company and how we will survive financially and grow. So we're not thinking about this in terms of woke. This is about the business and growing the business and preparing the business for the future. We're certainly aware of the political climate, and we're careful to make sure that when we talk about what we're doing, it is based in we are a company, a for-profit company. And like I said, we make money when people buy things using MasterCard. So that's not going to change at its core. So what we're investing in, it is doing well by doing good, and that is the philosophy of the company.
Do you deal with worries about being perceived as being too sustainability forward, too woke?
I think it's certainly on everybody's minds in terms of what's going on with the climate. But again, I think our examples and what we're doing, they're based on market demands.
Being smart rather than being woke.
Right. They're being smart. They're generating business opportunities. When we look at our carbon calculator sales, and that's a product we sell, sales numbers are good. So there's demand for these things, and especially as the regulation comes in, this isn't so much an option. Companies have to disclose, they have to report. Goals have been set. Not just for us, but for most of our clients, most of the people on our value chain. So it's all about now, how do we monetize that? How do we create new markets for that? How do we create new products for that, and be successful as a business?
So in many ways, as long as the primary driver stays focused on the company's success, you can kind of ignore what it looks like in terms of appearances, or you can not necessarily shrug them off, but you can justify your actions in terms of delivering on the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think that's important. But I'll also say the values of the company are also clear.
Let me turn to two final questions. We're just about out of time here. This one also from Marshall Dinowitz. Does the government have a role in regulating sustainability initiatives among credit card companies? And how do those relate to things that are happening in the financial sector as a whole?
Yeah, so, in general, again, I think there have been some examples of regulation that has really advanced the agenda here. So things like the Inflation Reduction Act. And again, I'll point to, in Europe, the product passport regulation, which wouldn't be direct to a credit card company, but could be part of that. One of the things that we did last year, it's not quite regulation, it was on our network. I didn't learn this until I came to Mastercard. Credit card companies have rules on their network, kind of like regulation, like what our issuers have to do, or our merchants have to do to be on our network. And we changed one of the rules last year, which was by 2028, all of our issuers, anybody who makes a Mastercard, who offers a card, it has to be made out of recycled or bio-based plastic. It was an industry first. It was kind of like a regulation. Rules change. And that, again, was a signal for us to say how important this is to us, but also then a signal for everybody in their pocket, those 3 billion cards that are out there. When it's in your wallet and you take it out and you're like feeling it, like, what is this made of? What am I buying? Am I making the best sustainable decision that I could? So I think there are things like that which could be really powerful in a positive way. There's plenty of regulation that also could be burdensome and all of those things. So I think figuring out how to ride the line of effective and efficient regulation can be very helpful.
Effective, efficient, and often subtle. Yeah. This last one was maybe not a question, but and I wish I could see the complete name of the question. It's Fundación something. We are building a relationship with Earth University here in Costa Rica. I want to acknowledge the Mastercard Foundation and the achievements it's making in supporting African students to study agricultural sciences at Earth University. We thank you for helping to put these remarkable young people on our path.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, the Mastercard Foundation, talk about doing well by doing good. The foundation started, right, when the company IPO'd and the leaders put a certain portion of the stock, towards the foundation, and it has grown. I mean, it is a very significant foundation, separate from the company. They focus exclusively on Africa, and the work that they do is incredibly inspiring. So that's wonderful to hear.
We only have about 1 minute left, and I'm sure there are many things that I should have asked you that I didn't. Is there one thing that you particularly wanted to speak to that didn't come up in our conversation?
Well, it came up, but I just want to underscore back to thinking about Stanford students, the community, and all these career conversations that I keep having. How do I become, a part of a sustainability team? How do I become a chief sustainability officer? And I think this idea that every job is a sustainability job, like, who within Mastercard has the most power to decide if we're going to hit all of our sustainability goals? It is not me, right? It's not me. Right now, if I just look at, for example, our carbon footprint, it's our head of technology and the person in charge of our data centers. Like, they didn't go to a sustainability school, to get their degree. They're sitting in a decision-making role that will affect our journey to net zero, right? And the second most powerful job, if we're just looking at our carbon footprint, that's our head of marketing, right? That's the second biggest part of the footprint. Did that person, study sustainability? Was it part of their career path? No, but they are now responsible. They're making decisions that are going to affect the trajectory. So, it may not be jobs like mine that are the most impactful on this journey that we're all on. So just be very aware of that. And I would say consider that when you're thinking about your career.
Ellen Jackowski, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Thanks to all of you in the audience, and thanks to the great Stanford Woods Institute team, especially Celia Price, Molly Field, Chris Black, and our great video team led by Justin Moran. Thanks everyone, and farewell.